Imagine walking through a quiet Mughal courtyard at dusk, the air heavy with the scent of sandalwood and something far darker, fear. Imagine being led toward a punishment so brutal, so ingeniously cruel, that even the official chroniclers hesitated to record its full details. Tonight, you're about to witness a method of suffering buried deep beneath the empire's glittering splendor. A punishment designed not just to hurt the body, but to shatter the soul. The Mughal Empire is often remembered for its breathtaking architecture, its flourishing arts, and its rulers draped in silk, jewels, and absolute authority. But beneath that grandeur existed a darker machinery, one built on fear, obedience, and punishment so severe that even seasoned soldiers whispered about them behind closed doors. To understand the horrifying punishment you're about to discover, we first need to step inside the world that created it, a world where power was everything, and losing it could mean your life. By the 16th and 17th centuries, the Mughals had perfected the art of governance through spectacle. Justice wasn't just justice. It was theater designed to intimidate subjects and rivals alike. Public punishments weren't merely meant to correct behavior. They existed to send a message that disobedience, betrayal, or even minor disloyalty would be met with consequences beyond imagination. This was an era where emperors like Akbar, Jahangir, and Aurangzeb balanced mercy with calculated brutality. Each ruler developed their own philosophy of justice, but the foundation remained the same. Nothing must ever threaten the throne. And in a society where royal decrees were final, punishments became instruments of control, woven into the empire's political, military, and psychological fabric. But the most horrifying methods were not used often. They were reserved for the worst betrayals, acts that challenged imperial authority or threatened the delicate stability of court. Spies who double-crossed the emperor, courtiers who plotted in the shadows, guards who turned their backs at the wrong moment. These were not crimes the state tolerated, and when caught, the offenders were subjected to punishments engineered not only to destroy the body but to extinguish hope itself. Many of these methods never appeared in official histories, instead surviving through travelers' accounts, diaries, and the testimonies of those who lived on the fringes of imperial power. Tonight, we explore one such punishment, so rare, so cruel, and so psychologically devastating that even seasoned chroniclers hesitated to describe it plainly. It was designed with a chilling purpose, to make the condemned suffer slowly, trapped in a cycle of dread, pain, and isolation until they were completely collapsed. This was not just about death. This was about erasing a person from the inside out. And the deeper we go into this story, the more you'll understand why even the boldest Mughal insiders prayed never to witness it. Because in the Empire of Splendor, some shadows were darker than night itself. Before we go deeper into this dark chapter of Mughal history, let me ask you something simple. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy unsettling stories from the shadows of the past, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts below. That I am the heart of the Mughal Empire, where towering palace walls cast long shadows across bustling courtyards. There existed a form of punishment so deeply woven into the empire's legal and symbolic language that its mere mention could make even loyal subjects fall silent. And as we begin this story, I want you to imagine a single man, an ordinary soldier, a father, a brother, standing on the edge of a courtyard he once crossed proudly in uniform, now surrounded by guards who won't meet his eyes. Because in the Mughal world, punishment by elephant wasn't simply a method of execution. It was a stage upon which loyalty, betrayal, authority, and imperial spectacle collided in a single moment. And as we follow this man's final journey, you will begin to understand why this punishment, though fully documented and widely known at the time, still managed to instill a quiet terror throughout the cities and villages of the empire. The story begins at dawn, when the soldier was seized for desertion, an offense the empire considered both a crime and an insult, because in a state where emperors balanced their power on the backs of massive armies, every soldier's vow was a thread that held the empire together, and breaking that vow was more than disobedience. It was a crack in the foundation. He knew the penalty. Everyone knew. There were no secrets about this particular punishment, no whispers passed behind curtains, because the strength of the Mughal court depended on its visibility, on the emperor's ability to remind the people that justice was not delivered in shadows but under open skies, with witnesses and ritual and the deliberate weight of tradition. And so, as the soldier was marched through the fort gates, he wasn't taken to a dungeon or interrogation room, but to a broad courtyard ring with carved stone pavilions, a place where emperors once held court. and where, on certain days, elephants stood waiting with chains looped across their thick legs and mahouts perched lightly behind their ears. Now, if you imagine elephants as gentle, ceremonial animals, you wouldn't be wrong. They were symbols of royal power, trained for war, parades, and even ceremonial greetings. But the same animals, under command, could be instruments of justice. Here's something most people don't know. Mughal elephants were trained with remarkable precision, capable of stepping lightly or crushing down with full force depending on the mahout's touch. And this duality, this perfect control, is what made them such potent agents of imperial authority. But in many cases, including the one we're exploring today, the punishment wasn't immediate, because the purpose wasn't simply death. It was demonstration, reflection, and the psychological stripping away of defiance. So the soldier was brought into the courtyard and placed before the crowd that had already begun to gather: merchants, farmers, palace staff, travelers passing through the city, all drawn by the soft but unmistakable signal of drums that announced an imperial judgment. Some in the crowd felt pity, some fear, and some a bit of relief that it wasn't a name called that morning. But everyone watched. And this is where the story becomes deeply human, because the condemned man wasn't a villain or mastermind or rebel general. He was someone who'd grown tired of marching, tired of long campaigns, tired of missing home, and after slipping away to return to his village for only a few days, he was found, dragged back, and accused of weakening the emperor's army by abandoning his post. Desertion, to the Mughals, wasn't merely absence. It was betrayal, and betrayal demanded a punishment the whole community could understand. The elephant stood nearby, its massive body painted with bright pigments for ceremonial readiness, though there was nothing celebratory about the scene. The mahout held a metal hook gently against its shoulder, not as cruelty but as communication. Mahouts and elephants shared a bond formed over years, and the animal responded to every shift, every breath. The soldier was forced to stand a few yards from the elephant's front feet, close enough to feel the ground tremble with its movements. But the emperor's decree often allowed for a final moment of reflection, a final chance to speak or declare an explanation, and although no plea could overturn the punishment, the ritual mattered. The empire believed in order, in formality, in justice as performance. And so, as the sun climbed slowly above the walls, the soldier spake, not a lengthy defense, not a dramatic confession, but quiet words about his home, his family, and his fear, words that didn't change his fate but rippled through the crowd, softening the atmosphere with an uncomfortable understanding that sometimes punishment fell on ordinary people caught between duty and exhaustion. The officer overseeing the execution listened without emotion, because his role wasn't to judge but to enact the emperor's law, and when the soldier finished speaking, the officer raised a hand. The mahout shifted. The elephant moved forward, not with violence or rage, but with deliberate slowness, trained to prolong the moment so the audience could witness the gravity of imperial authority. And here's where the psychological aspect became most profound. The elephant didn't touch the man immediately. Instead, it stepped close enough that its shadow fell across him, close enough that he could feel the warm air from its trunk, close enough that the possibility, more than the action, began to break him. Mughal chroniclers wrote that this moment, the suspended instant before the final command, was often the most feared part of the punishment, because time stretched thin, every breath grew tight, and the human mind raced through every memory, every regret, every possibility that might have changed this outcome. Some accounts say that emperors occasionally intervened at this stage, sparing a condemned man to demonstrate mercy, transforming the moment into an act of imperial generosity. But today, no such intervention came. The soldier trembled, the crowd stood silent, and the elephant waited for the signal. What's fascinating is how deeply controlled the process was. These elephants weren't wild instruments of destruction. They were trained to respond with exact force, whether to frighten, to injure, or to execute, and the empire relied on this precision to maintain the balance between spectacle and order. And as we witness this moment through history's lens, we begin to understand why this punishment, though fully legal and widely recognized, carried such immense psychological power. It wasn't the violence itself that terrified people, but the anticipation, the growing realization that the emperor's authority could reach anyone, anywhere, and turn even the gentlest creature into a symbol of judgment. And while the soldier stood frozen beneath the elephant's towering presence, the mahout finally received a subtle nod from the officer, a gesture so small the crowd could barely see it, but one that sealed a man's fate and reminded everyone who watched that in the Mughal Empire, justice moved not with haste but with ceremony, precision, and the immense weight of imperial will that eye in the tense silence of the courtyard. The condemned soldier felt every eye upon him, each gaze heavy with anticipation, judgment, or quiet pity, as though the empire itself had descended to observe his final moments, and he realized that the punishment by elephant was not simply a method of execution, but a meticulous performance designed to instill absolute obedience, a ritual that transformed fear into spectacle and reminded everyone present that the emperor's authority was both omnipresent and inescapable. And in this suspended moment, he reflected on every decision that had led him here. The brief moments of longing for home, the fleeting thought of escape, the unspoken desire to feel free even for a day. And as the mahout adjusted the elephant's chains with calm precision, he could hear the soft murmur of the crowd shifting uneasily, a reminder that though they were spectators, they were part of the ritual too, part of the empire's system of control that depended on collective witness. And it was this realization that made the courtyard feel unbearably vast and simultaneously claustrophobic, the stone walls echoing every heartbeat, every tremor of fear, as if amplifying the weight of imperial justice itself. And he thought of his family, the few faces he had glimpsed in fleeting moments of memory, their expressions frozen in his mind, as though their hopes and prayers were now interwoven with the courtyard's very stones. And he understood that punishment here was as much about breaking the human spirit as it was about teaching a lesson to all who watched. And in this realization, a peculiar mixture of dread and clarity washed over him, and he noticed the elephant's enormous eye, calm but watchful, as if it sensed attention, the trembling human before it, aware of the responsibility placed upon it by centuries of imperial training, and though the creature remained still, its sheer presence exerted a gravitational pull on the mind, bending attention inward, forcing contemplation, reflection, and a confrontation with mortality that was deliberate, intentional, and inescapable. And the mahout shifted slightly, murmuring commands that were inaudible to the crowd but perfectly understood by the trained elephant, demonstrating the precise control that turned an otherwise gentle creature into a symbol of imperial authority. And as the sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the courtyard, the soldier's throat tightened, dry and uncooperative, and every breath he drew reminded him of the fragility of life, the tenuousness of existence, the merciless structure of an empire that demanded perfection, loyalty, and obedience, and he remembered tales he had overheard in the barracks, whispers of others who had faced the same punishment, their fate sealed not only by the emperor's decree but by the psychological weight imposed long before the final act, and he understood, painfully, that fear had already begun its work within him, bending his thoughts, accelerating his pulse, and narrowing his perception to the elephant, the mahout, and the invisible lines that separated survival from annihilation, and the crowd shifted, some hiding faces in hands, others leaning forward, driven by morbid curiosity, as they witnessed not merely a man awaiting death, but a carefully choreographed moment of societal reinforcement, where obedience and order were maintained not by negotiation but by unmistakable demonstration. And within this theater, he felt both hyper-aware and infinitesimally small, the enormity of centuries of tradition, pressing down upon him, and in a sudden, disorienting flash, he recalled the stories of his comrades, those who had faltered in service, those who had slipped even briefly from the disciplined path, and how the empire's memory did not forgive, did not forget, did not allow the slightest lapse. And in that memory he realized the depth of the empire's reach, how it could take an ordinary man and, through ritual and precision, elevate fear into art and authority, into something palpable that the mind could scarcely resist, and though he struggled to maintain composure, the pressure of centuries, the weight of history, seemed to converge in this singular moment, bending time, stretching seconds into hours, and forcing him to confront not just his fate, but the intricate design that made this punishment legendary in its psychological impact, even when the physical act was restrained, deliberate, and calculated, and as the elephant shifted its massive weight, brushing subtly against the ground, the vibrations traveled through his very bones, embedding themselves deep within him, a stark reminder that life and death here were mediated through both the seen and the unseen, the physical and the psychological, and the crowd absorbed it all in silence, recognizing the enormity of the ritual, the subtle cruelty embedded in anticipation, and the profound authority that allowed a single human, an elephant, and an emperor to intersect in such precise, consequential choreography. And in that stillness, He felt a strange clarity and almost a real acceptance that the punishment was not instantaneous, but a process, and that process had already begun long before he reached the courtyard. In every decision, every act of duty or disobedience, every missed opportunity, and he understood the terrifying efficacy of such methods, how they etch obedience into memory not only through pain but through prolonged awareness, reflection, and anticipation. And in the suspended state, he noticed the smallest details, the glint of metal from the guard weapons, the subtle shift of expression in the faces around him, the heat of the morning sun on his skin, the rhythmic cadence of drums somewhere beyond the walls, all conspiring to create an environment where every sense was sharpened, every emotion amplified, and every thought inevitably drawn in with the one unavoidable truth, that the empire's justice, precise, public, and ritualized, was absolute, and that the line between ordinary life and imperial consequence was not just thin, it was invisible until crossed. And as Mughal adjusted the elephant one final time, the soldier felt a final tremor of fear ripple through him, a wave that had begun long before the gates opened, long before he was seized, a wave born from centuries of observation, practice, and the empire's meticulous cultivation of power. And as the sun reached its zenith, casting long, angular shadows across the courtyard, he understood that this moment was not just punishment, but education, demonstration, and assertion of authority, a lesson for all who watched, a narrative written in human consciousness, memory, and the unyielding will of empire. And in the stillness that followed, every eye remained fixed, every thought suspended. And the elephant, silent yet immense, embodied the empire's ability to transform order, loyalty, and fear into an unforgettable, inescapable, and chilling spectacle. And the soldier, trapped within the gravity of this living ritual, experienced a kind of clarity and horror that would remain long after the courtyard emptied, the elephant withdrew, and the crowd dispersed, leaving the echoes of an empire's authority imprinted deeply upon the memory of all who had witnessed the deliberate, slow, and psychologically exacting exercise of justice that as the courtyard settled into a tense stillness after the initial moment of anticipation, the soldier's mind raced, caught between the inevitability of fate and the involuntary recollection of every choice that had led him to this point, and he realized that punishment by elephant, though outwardly deliberate and ceremonious, was as much an internal trial as it was a public one, a test of mental endurance, a confrontation with one's own mortality. And as Mughal guided the elephant forward with subtle commands, the ground vibrating beneath its immense feet, he could feel the weight of history pressing down, not just on him but on everyone witnessing the event, the courtyard walls seeming to expand and contract in unison with the collective heartbeat of the assembly. And in that pressure, the soldier understood the precision of Mughal ritual justice, how the empire had honed centuries of observation and control into a performance capable of altering human consciousness, a performance in which fear, obedience, and respect for authority coalesce into a single, inescapable force. And as he recalled the stories of previous soldiers, nobles, and dissenters who had met similar fates, he saw patterns emerge, the meticulous staging of events, the use of trained elephants to embody imperial power, the careful calibration of anticipation, the orchestrated involvement of the crowd, each element designed to reinforce the lesson that disloyalty would never go unnoticed. And it struck him that this was not merely punishment. It was a form of psychological instruction, an education in the consequences of stepping beyond the boundaries defined by the emperor. And as the elephant's massive shadow loomed closer, he noticed the reactions of the spectators, some gripping the railings of the pavilions, some pressing hand to their mouths, others staring blankly, absorbed in the hypnotic gravity of the unfolding ritual. And he realized that they, too, were participants, part of a system in which fear was contagious, a shared experience designed to maintain order. And in that realization, he felt the isolation of his own body, every nerve alert, every sense magnified, yet utterly alone within the throng. And his mind turned inward, recalling the cadence of commands, the soft murmurs of the Mughal, the subtle shifts in the elephant's stance, the way the sun cast elongated shadows across the stone floor, the way dust drifted through the warm air, each element forming a tableau of power, authority, and inevitability. And the psychological weight of that tableau was greater than any physical force, for in the Mughal Empire, the mind could be disciplined, dominated, and subdued long before the body met its fate. And he understood, with chilling clarity, that the empire's justice operated as both a mechanism of punishment and a tool of societal control, embedding obedience into memory and imagination, extending far beyond the courtyard, reaching villages, forts, and cities, shaping behavior through narrative as much as action. And the elephant moved again, deliberate, precise, every step measured, an instrument not of caprice but of centuries of training, authority, and ritualized law. And as it shifted, he felt the almost imperceptible vibrations in the stone beneath his feet, reminding him that the empire's power could manifest in subtle ways, that fear could be conveyed without a single cry, a single act of violence, yet be fully comprehended, fully felt. And he noticed the expressions of those around him, guards, soldiers, commoners, courtiers, all engaged in silent witness, their attention confirming the efficacy of the spectacle, the deliberate orchestration of presence, control, and observation. And as he reflected, he considered the intricate balance the emperors maintained, to instill terror without eroding loyalty, to demonstrate the reach of authority without inciting rebellion, to transform punishment into lesson, display into doctrine, and observation into education. And he recognized that the cruelty of the method was secondary to the intelligence behind its application. And that was what made it terrifying, profound, and enduring, and he felt a final wave of awareness sweep over him, a combination of resignation, fear, and a peculiar understanding of the emperor's meticulous logic, that obedience and rebellion were measured not only in deeds but in perception, that punishment was as much about the empire's image as the individual's fate, and in that suspended consciousness, he experienced the duality of being both victim and witness, the complexity of being central to a ritual that simultaneously condemned and instructed, and as a mahout, whispered commands, subtle and precise, the elephant adjusted its posture, moving with a rhythm that communicated authority and inevitability, and the soldier's senses registered every detail. The sound of sandals scraping stone, the faint rustle of silk robes in the crowd, the intermittent murmur of prayers, the occasional creak of wooden railings, and through all of this, the soldier felt time stretch, seconds lengthening as anticipation sharpened, as if the entire courtyard and empire had condensed into this single, defining moment, and he contemplated the nature of power, the fragility of human life, the precision of control, and the inevitability of consequence, and though his body remained upright, his mind wavered under the weight of history, ritual, and observation, and he understood, finally, that punishment by elephant was not merely a method of execution but a comprehensive instrument of imperial influence, a physical and psychological demonstration of authority that could bend both the observer and the condemned to the same immutable law. And as the sun shifted and cast new angles of light across the courtyard, he experienced an intimate confrontation with mortality, obedience, and legacy. And in that confrontation, he became acutely aware of the subtle artistry behind the empire's justice, its ability to shape perception, to teach without words, to communicate with the inevitability of law. And as the elephant's shadow continued to loom, he felt the culmination of training, tradition, and power converge around him, a living embodiment of authority designed to impress, intimidate, and instruct simultaneously. And through it all, he noticed the quiet dignity of the mahout, the precise alignment of every step, the collective attention of the crowd, and in that alignment, the soldier comprehended the full scope of imperial design, the orchestration that turned fear into spectacle, anticipation into education, and presence into command. And as the ritual reached its apex, he felt a final internal shift, a mental surrender that reflected the efficiency of the empire's methods, the clarity of consequence, and the inescapable reach of authority. And in that moment, all the fear, all the anticipation, all the ritual, and all the weight of centuries converged in a singular awareness of the Mughal Empire's extraordinary ability to impose order through the deliberate, measured, and psychologically precise act of punishment. And as the crowd absorbed every detail, as the elephant embodied the power and reach of imperial law, and as the soldier stood at the fulcrum of history and ritual, the courtyard became more than a place. It became a symbol, a lesson, a testament to the empire's meticulous balance of spectacle, authority, and control, a moment that would resonate far beyond the stone walls, etched in memory, passed through whispers, chronicled in observation, and preserved as a powerful reminder that in the Mughal Empire, justice, fear, and obedience were inseparable, orchestrated, and undeniable, And as the ritual slowly concluded, the soldier's experience, his anticipation, reflection, and confrontation with authority remained a lasting imprint on those who witnessed, a culmination of centuries of tradition, careful design, and psychological understanding that defined not just punishment, but the very essence of imperial control. Standing in the quiet aftermath of the courtyard, after the ritual had run its full course and the elephant had been led away, the soldier's story lingered in the air, carried not by movement or sound but by the weight of memory itself. And it was here, in the suspended silence, that the true power of the punishment revealed itself, not through immediate pain, but through reflection, anticipation, and the subtle, inescapable imprint left on everyone who bore witness, a psychological echo that extended far beyond the palace walls. For centuries, the Mughal Empire had mastered this careful balance, demonstrating that authority was most potent not when exerted violently, but when enacted with precision, ritual, and an understanding of human perception. And it is precisely this combination that makes the story resonate even today, because what we see is more than a punishment. It is an enduring lesson about power, control, and the fragility of human will when confronted with the machinery of empire. And yet, amid all this weight, there is also a strangely human element. The soldier who faces fate, the mahout guiding a creature trained for both grace and force, the crowd silently absorbing the lesson, and the awareness that these events were shaped as much by human design as by the empire's towering authority, reminding us that history is not merely a record of rulers and decrees, but of the lives touched, altered, and remembered through these extraordinary moments. As we step away from this tale, it is worth reflecting on the subtle lessons it leaves behind, about duty, fear, obedience, and the power of ritualized justice to shape minds, societies, and memory. If you found this story compelling, take a moment to subscribe, hit the bell icon, like the video, and tell us in the comment what type of dark history stories you'd like to explore next, because your curiosity drives the next journey into the hidden corners of the past, and together we can continue uncovering the extraordinary, often terrifying, truths of human history that have been preserved in whispers, records, and the enduring echoes of empire.